At 52, Gabriella screamed. It was a shock, and it happened too quickly. You know that feeling when something unexpected occurs and your insides tighten with fear? Gabriella thought she had seen all the surprises life had to offer. For the past 5 years, since Roberto left after 28 years together, she had settled into a routine that felt unshakable. No one could truly understand what it felt like for a woman to look in the mirror and not recognize the reflection staring back, seeing only a shadow of who she once was. The truth that no one talks about is that aging hurts, especially when you start to believe that some doors have closed forever. This was how the story began that would change her life forever. Every morning, Gabriella woke at 5:30 a.m., even before the alarm rang. It was an old habit from the days when Roberto needed to be at the workshop by 7. For 40 years, she had trained herself to rise early to brew his coffee. Now, even alone, her body had not learned to sleep longer. The silence in the house felt oppressive, unlike the days when the quick footsteps of her children echoed through the hall of their home in Coyoacán. Gabriella had always been organized in her kitchen. Every pot had its place, every plate stacked neatly. Everything was meticulously arranged on the shelves that Roberto had built. He was a mechanic, with rough hands that smelled of oil and tools. But how gentle he became when he fixed something for her. "Gabita," he would say, "I'll make it just the way you like it." And he truly did. Today, she ran her hand along those shelves, feeling their sturdiness. It was the only thing left of him in the house, aside from a photograph on the living room shelf. Even as a widow, Gabriella never stopped taking care of herself. Every day, she applied her favorite light peach lip gloss and wore the perfume her daughter Carmen had gifted her for Christmas. She styled her hair, even if it was just to go to the bakery or the small market around the corner. It was important to her not to forget that she was still a woman. She reminded herself of this as she looked in the mirror. People saw her and thought, "There goes Mrs. Gabriella, always so well put together," even after Roberto left. But no one guessed that beneath the lipstick and neatly styled hair lived a woman who longed for feelings that were not often spoken of. Her children, Carmen and Miguel, had their own families now. Miguel had moved to Guadalajara with his wife and 2 sons, Diego and Mateo, aged 9 and 7. Carmen lived closer, in the Roma neighborhood, with her husband Fernando and their 11-year-old daughter Valentina. Every Sunday, they would visit, bringing food, fixing something around the house, and leaving behind a special emptiness that only grew as Gabriella sat and stared at the closed door. In the last 5 years, since Roberto's passing, routine had completely taken over her life. Wake up, brew coffee, tidy up a house that hardly got dirty, watch telenovelas, call her children and grandchildren. Sometimes a visit to the doctor felt more like a chance to talk than a necessity for health issues. Thank goodness she was as strong as an oak, as her mother used to say. But there were days when the silence pressed down so heavily that she turned on the radio just to hear a voice in the house. Carmen insisted that Gabriella needed a new wardrobe in her bedroom. "Mom, it's falling apart. The doors won't even close," she said during one of her Sunday visits. Gabriella resisted. Why spend money on new furniture at her age? But Carmen wouldn't back down, saying it was a gift, that it would be beautiful, that she deserved it. Eventually, Gabriella agreed, more to avoid disappointing her daughter than because she truly needed a new wardrobe. At the store, the saleswoman asked, "A carpenter will come to assemble the wardrobe for you on Wednesday morning. Will the owner be home?" Of course, she would be. Where else would a 52-year-old widow be on a Wednesday morning? Gabriella could never have imagined that this simple household visit would awaken something in her that she thought had long been dormant. That Tuesday evening, the night before the carpenter's arrival, Gabriella did something she hadn't done in a long time. She opened a bottle of perfume, the very one Roberto had given her on their last wedding anniversary. She didn't know why she did it. Perhaps it was simply time to stop saving beautiful things for special occasions that would never come. She fell asleep in a cloud of sweet fragrance, remembering what it felt like to be desired. When she woke up on Wednesday, she looked in the mirror and saw a 52-year-old woman. Her hair was more gray than black, wrinkles had begun to leave their mark on her face, but her eyes still held that same sparkle she thought had faded with Roberto. She applied her lipstick with extra care that day and styled her hair with more attention. This is just to feel good, she told herself, even though she knew that for the first time in a long while, someone else would enter her home besides the baker or the cashier at the market. The doorbell rang at 8:45 a.m. 5 years of living alone had taught her caution, so she first peered through the peephole. She saw a tall man in a blue uniform with the furniture store's logo. Taking a deep breath, she adjusted the pearl necklace she had put on. It felt excessive to dress up for a furniture assembler, but she opened the door, trying to appear natural, as if guests came to her home every day. "Good morning, Mrs. Gabriella. I'm Alejandro from Meubles del Valle. I'm here to assemble the wardrobe for you," he said. His voice was firm yet polite. He looked to be in his 30s, with dark hair and sun-kissed skin, large hands firmly holding a tablet with the order. His brown eyes looked directly at her, without the condescension that younger people often have towards older individuals, as if they saw children or ghosts. It was a gaze that truly saw her. "Good morning, come in," she replied, trying to hide the silly excitement she felt. "The bedroom is right here," she said, leading him down the hallway. The house smelled of fresh coffee and elote bread, a corn cake she had baked that morning. She didn't even know why she had done it. Perhaps she simply wanted the house to carry a pleasant aroma, rather than just the scent of laundry detergent and disinfectant that had been her constant companions for the past few years. Her home in Coyoacán was small, but every wall held a story. They had bought it in 1988 with great difficulty when the neighborhood was not what it is today. Gabriella and Roberto had saved every penny for years, dreaming of the day they would no longer rent. She remembered the day they signed the papers as if it were yesterday, when he swept her off her feet and carried her over the threshold as if they were newlyweds, even though they already had 2 children. She had chosen the red mosaic floor with white patterns herself. Roberto painted the walls. She had sewn the floral curtains by hand. The potted plants had been nurtured over the years, witnessing their children running through the house, then the teenagers grumbling, and now the adults bringing her grandchildren. Every corner of that house held memories. It was not just walls, it was pieces of their history. But in the last 5 years, it had felt more like a museum than a real home, a place where she carefully stored memories but hardly lived herself. Her bedroom was at the end of the hallway. The bed was still a double, even though she had slept on only one side for 5 years. She had never dared to replace it with a single bed. That would be equivalent to admitting that Roberto would never return. And while her mind understood, her heart was not ready to let go so easily. The old wardrobe had stood there since 1995 when they replaced the furniture after the earthquake that had affected the entire area. "Are we removing this one?" Alejandro asked, looking at the dark wooden wardrobe with warped doors from humidity. "Yes, that one," she replied, suddenly feeling a pang in her chest. It seemed silly to be sad about furniture, but how many times had she seen Roberto open those doors, pulling out his well-worn white shirt to go to work? How many times had she chosen a dress for her children's birthdays, for the Christmas dinner with the whole family, for Sunday Mass? "It's heavy," Alejandro said. "We'll need to disassemble it to take it out." "Do you have a box to put the things inside?" he asked, pulling tools from his backpack. Only then did she realize she hadn't thought of that. Oh God, I didn't prepare anything. But she found a few large supermarket bags. Will these do? They'll work perfectly, ma'am. I'll help you take everything out, he said. While she searched for the bags in the closet, a thought spun in her head. How awkward will it be if this man, a stranger, touches my most personal belongings? When she returned with the bags, Alejandro had already opened the wardrobe doors. A musty scent escaped from the old wood, like a breath from the past. Would you like to take the things out yourself, or would you prefer I help? He asked respectfully. Can I do it myself? She quickly replied. Inside lay clothes she didn't want him to see, old nightgowns, some still with tags, as she had never had enough special occasions to wear them. Photographs hidden in shoeboxes, letters that Roberto had written to her while he was away on business trips. Then I'll go and bring the rest. The new wardrobe is in the van, he said and left the room, giving her a moment alone with her things. She stood before the open wardrobe, feeling as if she had opened a time capsule. She found clothes she had forgotten about, a green dress she wore to Carmen's wedding, carefully wrapped in thin paper. A red skirt and jacket set bought for Miguel's graduation. She had been a teacher for so long that she had a dozen patterned skirts saved, almost an unofficial uniform for teachers of her generation. At the very bottom of the last drawer, she stumbled upon a box of Roberto's letters. She opened one, yellowed with age. My Gabita. That's how it began. He had been in Querétaro on a big project, writing about how much he missed her, how every night he saw her in his dreams. She quickly closed the letter, fearing that tears would fall onto the paper and ruin it. Some memories are so precious that returning to them is painful. When Alejandro returned with a large box of parts for the new wardrobe, she had already managed to half-empty the old one. He set the box down and began to work, unscrewing the door hinges with a screwdriver. The sound echoed in the room, reminding her of how Roberto always fixed everything in the house. You don't need to call anyone, Gabita. Your husband will do it himself, he would say, proudly showing off his skills. Now she had to call strangers. Now her affairs depended on the hands of others, the very tasks he once did with love. Ma'am, how long have you lived here? Alejandro asked, probably trying to break the silence in which she was drowning in her memories. Since '88, she replied, returning to the present. When we moved here, Coyoacán was very different. There wasn't such a flow of tourists, the streets were quieter. My mom has lived here for a long time too, not far from Viveros, he said, measuring the wall with a tape measure. She always says the neighborhood has changed too much. Gabriela was surprised by this coincidence. Viveros, she had taken her children there to ride bikes every Sunday. It was the only place where they had enough space to run around. Alejandro smiled, and for a moment, he ceased to be a stranger in her home. He became a person with whom she shared something, however fragile. It eased her a little. The room, once so familiar, began to change. The wardrobe without doors revealed its wooden frame, like an old secret. Her belongings, always neatly arranged, now lay in plastic bags on the floor. Dust that had accumulated behind the heavy wardrobe left peculiar patterns on the wall, marks of time that had passed unnoticed. Can I open the window, Mrs. Gabriela? There will be a lot of dust when I start cleaning the wardrobe, Alejandro asked. Of course, feel free, she replied, watching him move confidently around her room as if he had known it for a long time. He opened the window, and the morning sun flooded into the bedroom, illuminating corners that the wardrobe had hidden for decades. A single ray of sunlight fell directly on her face. She closed her eyes, enjoying the warmth on her skin. When she opened them again, she saw Alejandro looking at her. It was quick, he immediately looked away, realizing she had noticed. But for 1 second, just 1 second, his gaze was not the way men usually looked at a woman of her age. It was the gaze of a man who sees a woman. And in that moment, something long dormant within her began to awaken. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, trying to break the tension. Gabriella felt a light blush creeping to her cheeks. It was amusing to feel this way at 52, but in that brief moment when their eyes met, her body recalled sensations long forgotten. "Yes, please," Alejandro replied, returning his focus to the wardrobe. "I just need to finish unscrewing these last hinges." Gabriella stepped out of the bedroom, almost relieved to find a few moments in the kitchen to collect herself. As she prepared a tray with coffee and slices of cornbread, she caught sight of her hands. They bore the marks of time, prominent veins, a few spots, but they were still strong and well kept. She twisted her wedding ring around her finger, a habit formed over the years, and suddenly it felt heavier. It wasn't infidelity against Roberto, but she couldn't quite name what she felt. When she returned to the bedroom with the tray, she found Alejandro had completely dismantled the old wardrobe. The dark wooden boards leaned against the wall, and screws and hardware were neatly arranged on the floor. "Done. I've cleared everything out. Now I'll start assembling the new one," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Even with the window open, the room felt stifling, and he removed his work shirt, leaving him in a white t-shirt. Gabriella noticed the muscles in his strong arms, the arms of a man used to lifting heavy things. "Oh, coffee. Thank you so much, Mrs. Gabriella. You didn't have to go through the trouble." "It's no trouble at all," she replied, setting the tray on the nightstand. "It's nice to have company over a cup." Realizing how that sounded, she quickly added, I usually drink coffee alone, so this is a change." He smiled as he lifted the cup. "It smells wonderful. And this bread? Is it cornbread?" "My mother bakes the same kind," she nodded, feeling a strange sense of pride. "It's my mother's recipe. I learned it when I was younger." As he sipped his coffee, Gabriella began to notice details she hadn't before. His large hands, yet nimble fingers. A light stubble, neatly trimmed, and a small scar on his left brow. The way he blew on the coffee before taking a sip reminded her of Roberto. She looked away, embarrassed by her own thoughts. "Do you have children?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Two," she replied. "Miguel and Carmen, and 3 grandchildren." "How wonderful," he smiled. "It must be nice to have a big family." "Yes, but they don't live here anymore. Miguel is in Guadalajara, Carmen is in Rome, close, but not nearby. They come over on Sundays." Saying it so plainly made her realize how lonely her life sounded. "I live only with my mom," he said. "My dad passed away 4 years ago, and I didn't want to leave her alone, you know?" Something warmed inside her at those words. A young man caring for his mother, not leaving her alone. "Your mother is lucky to have you," she said sincerely. He finished his coffee and returned to work, starting to unpack the parts of the new wardrobe. It was lighter, modern, with sliding doors and mirrors. "This wardrobe will look beautiful here, Mrs. Gabriella." "Much brighter than the old one," he noted, examining the pieces. She watched as he assembled the base, measuring, leveling, checking. There was something mesmerizing in his movements, as if each was choreographed. The muscles in his back flexed under the thin fabric of his t-shirt as he bent to grab a screw or lifted a board. It was a beauty she had long forgotten, the beauty of strength, movement, a body at work. "What did you do before retirement?" he asked, not breaking his focus. "I was a teacher," she replied, surprised by the question. "I taught at the elementary school nearby for 32 years. How did you guess I'm retired?" By your hands, he smiled slightly, his face lighting up with youthful energy. My mom was also a teacher. She has hands just like yours. She says it's from writing on the board and grading papers. Automatically, she looked at her hands, surprised by his attentiveness. Your mother has good observation, she said. And do you have good observation too? He replied, picking up a screwdriver. You noticed I have a scar on my brow. Most people don't even see it. Gabriella felt her face flush again. He realized she had been studying him. Teachers are trained to notice everything, she tried to respond casually. You need to understand if a student has problems or if they grasp the lesson. A comfortable silence enveloped the room. The sounds of tools, the scent of new wood, and his very presence filled the space with a sensation she hadn't felt in years. She caught herself enjoying the feeling of not being alone, sharing the space, breathing the same air. Mrs. Gabriella, could you help me for a moment? He asked, holding a large board. I need you to hold this part while I secure it on the other side. She approached, feeling nervous, not quite understanding why. Standing next to him, she immediately noticed how much taller he was. This closeness made her heart race, as if she were a girl again, not a 52-year-old woman. She held the board where he indicated, feeling the weight of the wood. Just like that. Perfect, he said, securing the other end. Their hands were almost touching, so close that she could feel his warmth, a faint scent of soap mingled with a hint of sweat from work, a clean, masculine aroma. When he finished securing the board, their hands brushed against each other for a fleeting moment. It felt like a tiny electric shock, so unexpected that she almost dropped the wood. I'm sorry, she whispered, though it wasn't necessary. It's all good, he replied with a gentle smile, as if he understood her nervousness. You really helped me. She sat back on the edge of the bed and watched him work. Now he was assembling the side pieces of the wardrobe, and it was gradually taking shape. It was strange to see her bedroom changing. A part of her past was leaving, making way for something new. And along with the old wardrobe, it felt as if something within her was also shifting, clearing the way for long-forgotten or new feelings. As she watched, something inside her finally awakened. She felt her skin becoming sensitive, her breath quickening, warmth spreading through her body, a warmth she hadn't experienced in many years. It wasn't just the joy of having someone in the house, it was something deeper, more primal. It was desire. The realization that she was still capable of feeling this at 52, after 5 years of emotional and physical emptiness, was both frightening and liberating. Mrs. Gabriella, do you have plans for the rest of the room? Alejandro asked, installing the hinges for the doors. This wardrobe is modern. It would look nice if the walls were painted. Honestly, I hadn't thought about it, she admitted. Sometimes a small change allows you to see everything differently, he said casually. My mom painted the kitchen yellow last year, and now she says she lives in a new house. His words struck a chord within her. For the last 5 years, she had tried to keep everything exactly as it was when Roberto was alive, as if any change could erase his memory. But perhaps it was time to allow herself some changes, not to forget the past, but to make room for the present. I think you're right, she said, surprising herself with her own words. Maybe I'll paint the walls light blue? Alejandro smiled, genuinely pleased with her decision. Light blue would be great, more light. This simple conversation about paint felt much deeper. They seemed to be talking about walls, but she was thinking about her life, about how it might be time to let in more light after years in the shadow of loss. Alejandro continued to assemble the wardrobe confidently. His hands moved precisely and calmly. She couldn't take her eyes off him. In those confident movements was a certain grace, and she watched him work as if enchanted. He was installing the internal shelves, carefully measuring the level, fitting each piece. "Do you prefer the rod higher or lower for hangers?" he asked, glancing at her. She caught herself staring too intently and quickly looked away, embarrassed. "Lower, please," she replied, feeling foolish for being so acutely aware of her presence. "I'm not tall, like my mother," she added. He smiled. "She always complains that she can't reach the hangers when they're too high." That comparison to his mother should have reminded her of her age, but strangely, she didn't feel old. On the contrary, there was something soothing in his words. He spoke without a hint of condescension, only with respect. "Would you like another cup of coffee?" she offered, feeling the need to step out of the bedroom for a moment, away from the closeness that was too exciting. "If it's not too much trouble, I'd love some. This work makes me thirsty." She walked to the kitchen, her legs slightly trembling. As she brewed the coffee, she caught herself wondering, what is happening to me? Is it just the lack of company, years of solitude making me react so strongly to another person's presence in the house? Or was it something more, something I was afraid to admit even to myself? When she returned with the coffee, Alejandro was installing the sliding doors of the wardrobe. They were large, full height, with mirrors. She paused in the doorway for a moment, watching. In the reflection, she saw herself, a woman with gray hair and a dark blue skirt and a white blouse adorned with a pearl necklace, next to Alejandro, strong and young, focused on his work. The contrast in the mirror struck her sharply, a pang of shame, sadness, something she couldn't even name. "Wow, these doors are heavy," he said, accepting the coffee she handed him. "Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Gabriella. It's just as delicious as my mom's. Her coffee is famous in the family." "It's just coffee brewed the old-fashioned way, in a traditional filter, like they used to do," she replied, trying to sound casual, though she felt warmth in her chest from the compliment. "Sometimes the old way is the best," he said. And for some reason, that phrase carried a special meaning. They fell silent for a few minutes. He drank his coffee while she sat on the edge of the bed, watching him assemble the new wardrobe. It felt strange. This modern piece of furniture didn't quite match the steel bedroom, the old bed, faded curtains, and peeling wallpaper. "It seems I'll have to update the whole bedroom," she murmured more to herself than to him. "Updating is good," Alejandro replied, placing the empty cup on the tray. "Sometimes it's helpful to change something." He returned to work, installing the internal shelves. She watched, thinking about how the room would change if everything in it were new. A different bed, maybe even smaller, since she only slept on one side. New curtains, light wallpaper. Who knows, maybe even a modern lamp on the nightstand. "You know, this wardrobe has made me think," she said, breaking the silence. "I haven't changed anything here in so long. It's as if I was afraid to erase memories if I updated everything." Alejandro paused and looked at her with understanding. "My mom was the same after my father passed. She didn't want to touch anything. But one day she told me words I'll never forget: memories aren't in things, they're in us." Those words struck her like a lightning bolt. There it was. She had been afraid of losing Roberto again if she removed everything he had touched, everything he loved. But he wasn't in those things. He was in her memory, in her heart. "Your mother is a wise woman," she said, feeling tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, she is. I think you would have gotten along with her," he smiled. There was a special softness in his voice that touched her deeply. It wasn't pity or condescension, it was genuine concern, a real connection, as if he truly cared. "And now comes the hardest part," he said, picking up a large board that would become the base of the wardrobe. "This part is a bit tricky." "I'll help," she offered, rising from the bed. Great. Hold this edge while I insert the other side. She stepped closer and held the board where he indicated. He moved to the other side and began to fit it. The wood resisted, stubbornly refusing to yield. This isn't easy, she remarked, watching his efforts. It's not about strength here, Alejandro explained, adjusting the board. It's more about technique. You need to find the right angle. There was something in those words that made her cheeks flush. Technique, the right angle. Why did it sound so ambiguous, as if it referred to something more than just assembling furniture? He continued focused, the furrow on his brow deepening. She saw a drop of sweat roll down his face to his neck and disappear under his t-shirt. Inside her, warmth ignited, a warmth she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Looks like it's almost in, he murmured, pressing harder. Suddenly, the board gave way and snapped into place with a loud click. It's in, she exclaimed before she could think. She immediately regretted saying it. Alejandro looked at her, and as Alejandro stood there, a slow smile crept onto his lips. A playful glint sparkled in his eyes, as if he had caught the double meaning in her words. Gabriella felt her cheeks flush, but alongside that embarrassment came an unexpected urge to laugh. Yes, it's in, he confirmed, his voice dropping to a lower, almost intimate tone. For a moment, they simply gazed at each other, an electric tension hanging in the air that hadn't been there before. He was the first to look away, returning his focus to the wardrobe. Just need to adjust the drawers, and it'll be ready, he said, slipping back into his professional demeanor. Gabriella stepped aside, her mind still reeling from what had just transpired. Was it just her imagination, or had something flickered in his gaze at that moment? What had they shared? Doubt crept in, making her question her own feelings. You know, as I recount this part of my story, I think of you, the one listening. Perhaps you carry a burden that no one else can see, the pain you keep to yourself. Sometimes we feel so alone in our struggles, don't we? I would love to know what you're feeling. If you want to share, drop a comment below. I understand that pain because I've been through it myself. It could be just one word. You don't have to tell everything. Your comment might be the very embrace someone else needs right now. You know? There are so many people watching silently, thinking they are the only ones suffering this much. But when you share even a piece of your story, you show others they are not alone. It's like reaching out to someone walking in the dark. And as I continue my tale, know that I'm here, listening with all my heart. Gabriella settled back onto the bed, watching Alejandro as he installed the drawers. Each one slid effortlessly along the tracks, opening and closing perfectly. It was strange how something so simple could look so beautiful. The new drawers were empty, ready to be filled with belongings, as if inviting her to start something new. And at that moment, she realized she was feeling something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the presence of another person in her home, nor merely a disruption of her usual routine, it was desire, a desire she thought had been buried with Roberto. And that realization scared her more than anything else. I think it's time to start putting your things in the new wardrobe, Mrs. Gabriella. Alejandro's voice pulled her from her tangled thoughts. He had just finished installing the drawers, and now the wardrobe stood completed, majestic against the wall, its mirrored doors reflecting the entire bedroom. It looks beautiful, she said, rising to inspect the result more closely. The furniture was indeed lovely, light wood, silver handles on the drawers, mirrors on the doors that made the room feel larger and brighter. Now you have enough space for all your things, Alejandro said, demonstrating how smoothly the doors glided open. And look, there's a section with special hooks for scarves and belts. She stepped closer to examine it. In the mirror, they appeared side by side, him behind her, tall and strong. His brown eyes met hers through the reflection. For a moment, it felt as if they were posing for a shared photograph. It was a strange yet right picture. She quickly looked away, flustered by her own thoughts. Very practical, she agreed, stepping back slightly. I'll have to get used to such modernity. You'll like it, I'm sure, he replied, then gestured to the bags on the floor. Do you want me to help you fold your clothes? The mere thought of Alejandro touching her undergarments made her cheeks flush instantly. No, that's okay, she replied, perhaps too hastily. I'll do it myself later. He nodded in understanding. Of course, I understand. Well, I think my work here is done. A strange sense of disappointment washed over her. He would leave, and the house would once again sink into its familiar silence, into solitary routine. It shouldn't matter so much, but it did. And I still need to take out this old junk, he continued, pointing to the disassembled parts of the old wardrobe. I'll take everything downstairs and load it into the truck for disposal. Okay, she agreed, feeling an irrational sense of relief. Just a few more minutes of his presence. Alejandro began lifting the larger boards. She watched as his muscles tensed under the strain, his shirt riding up slightly, revealing a strip of sun-kissed skin as he bent. A wave of heat coursed through her, and she quickly turned away, embarrassed by her own reaction. It was absurd. She was 52, a widow, a mother, a grandmother. She shouldn't be feeling this way, especially towards a man who could be her son. What would Roberto think? What would the kids say? What was happening to her? As Alejandro made several trips back and forth, carrying parts of the old wardrobe, Gabriela stood in the middle of the bedroom, bewildered. One part of her, the practical, respectable retiree, the widow, insisted that she was simply lonely, that this strange feeling was just a lack of warmth manifesting itself oddly. But another part, the one she had buried long ago and hardly recognized, insisted that what she was feeling was real, authentic, legitimate, human. Mrs. Gabriela, are you all right? Alejandro's voice pulled her from her internal debate. He stood in the doorway, looking at her with a hint of concern. Yes, yes, she replied, forcing a smile. I was just thinking about how to organize everything better. I understand, he smiled back. Just need to take out the base of the old wardrobe. That's the heaviest part. She looked at the massive wooden base leaning against the wall. It was indeed huge and looked very heavy. Are you sure you can manage it alone? Don't hurt your back, she said. I'm used to it, he assured her, moving toward the piece. I do this every day. But when he attempted to lift the base, she noticed it was much heavier than he had anticipated. The wood was old and solid, far sturdier and heavier than modern furniture. Wait, let me at least open the door wider for you to get through more easily, she suggested, fully opening the bedroom door. Alejandro adjusted his grip and, straining, lifted the base. She could see the muscles in his neck tense, his hands quivering under the weight. He took a couple of steps toward the door, but the base suddenly slipped slightly in his grasp. Careful, she exclaimed, rushing to help. I'm fine, he exhaled through the strain, but continued moving. As he passed by her in the doorway, the base swayed again, and instinctively, she reached out to support him. And then it happened. Her hands brushed against his. Both were holding the heavy wood. The doorway was narrow, and suddenly they were very close, almost touching. She felt the warmth of his body, the scent of his skin mixed with the clean sweat of hard work. Their eyes locked, and for a timeless moment, they stood there, caught in that moment. It felt as if time had stopped. She could feel her heart pounding so loudly that he must have heard it. His hands, large and strong, burned under hers. His face was so close she could see every detail, a small scar by his lip, dark lashes, a hint of stubble casting shadows on his jaw. "I can handle this myself," he said in a husky, deeper voice. "Of course," she replied, abruptly pulling her hands away and stepping back as if jolted by electricity. "I'm sorry." He moved down the hallway with the heavy bass, while she remained, leaning against the wall. Her heart raced, her hands trembled slightly. What had just happened? What had she done, and more importantly, what had she felt? When Alejandro returned, he looked just as flustered as she felt. A light blush crept onto his cheeks, and he avoided looking directly into her eyes. "Well, it seems like that's everything," he said, trying to keep his voice professional. "The wardrobe is ready, and I've taken all the old materials for disposal." "Thank you," she replied, also trying to maintain her composure. It turned out beautifully. A strange silence hung between them, filled with something undefined. There was no awkwardness, but the tension was palpable. It was as if they both understood that something had changed, that an invisible line had been crossed. "Do you want me to adjust anything else?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Maybe the shelves or the height of the hooks?" "No, everything is perfect," she answered, realizing that she didn't really want him to leave but lacked the courage to ask him to stay. He nodded and picked up his toolbox. "Then I think my work here is done." In silence, they walked to the living room. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if they were moving in slow motion. At the front door, he turned to her. "It was nice to meet you, Mrs. Gabriella," he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake. She took his hand and felt that same electric spark from their earlier touch. "Likewise, Alejandro, and thank you for the excellent work." Their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary before he gently released hers. "If you need anything adjusted in the wardrobe, just call the store. I can come by and check." There was something more in his voice, a subtle hint, an open door. Or was it just her desperate yearning for company, for human warmth? "Thank you. I'll remember that," she replied, not promising anything but leaving the possibility open. He smiled, a smile that seemed to hide a secret, and then he left. She closed the door and stood still, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway of her home. Then came the sound of the elevator, and finally, silence reigned once more. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It felt different, filled with possibilities, unanswered questions, feelings that had lain dormant within her and suddenly awakened. She returned to her bedroom and looked at the new wardrobe, shining with its mirrored doors. In them, she saw a woman she barely recognized. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. A woman who, for the first time in 5 years, felt alive again, and that terrified her to her core. The rest of the day passed in a haze of confusion she hadn't felt since her youth. Every time she walked past the bedroom, she glanced at the new wardrobe, and memories of that moment in the doorway, his gaze, the touch of his hands on hers returned with renewed intensity. She caught herself unconsciously touching the very spot where his hands had been. That evening, when she finally began to put her things in the new wardrobe, each drawer she opened, each hook she hung her dresses on, brought Alejandro's image to life in her memory. How he had assembled the furniture, how his fingers moved with such precision, how focused his face had looked. She found herself staring too often into the mirrored doors of the wardrobe, as if searching for something new in her reflection, some outward sign of the changes happening within her. "I'm going crazy," she muttered to herself and slammed the wardrobe doors shut with unnecessary force. This was foolish. The next day, she tried to return to her routine. She woke up early, brewed coffee, tidied the house, and chatted on the phone about trivial matters. She didn't mention the new wardrobe or the installer. For some reason, she wanted to keep it to herself, like a precious secret. Or perhaps she was just ashamed of her tangled feelings. Later in the evening, while watering the flowers on her balcony, the doorbell rang. Her heart leaped instantly, and she cursed herself for it. Surely it was the mailman or someone asking for directions. Not him. Why would he come? She peered through the peephole and nearly dropped the watering can. On her doorstep stood Alejandro, but not in his work uniform. He wore jeans and a light blue shirt. His hair was slightly damp, as if he had just stepped out of the shower. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. What was he doing here? A problem with the wardrobe? No, that couldn't be. She opened the door, trying to appear casual. Alejandro, is there something wrong with the wardrobe? He hesitated, as if unsure what to say. Mrs. Gabriella, no, the wardrobe is fine. I came to check if you're doing okay. Sometimes the doors need adjusting the next day. It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. This wasn't standard practice for the store to come by for a checkup. He had come on his own. Got it, she replied, knowing what she should say. Everything is fine, thank you. And she should close the topic. But instead, she heard her own voice. Would you like to come in and check? A soft smile appeared on his face. If it wouldn't be an inconvenience? Of course not, she replied, opening the door wider. He stepped inside, and it felt as if the very atmosphere of the house came alive with him. The hallway seemed smaller, his height and presence filling the space. Subscribe to the channel,